Welcome to the Darkstream. Vox Day. Voxday.blogspot.com. No, voxday.net. And unauthorized.tv. Thanks for tuning in. Looks like I have a box here. Hang on, I gotta move it out of the way. Let's see what's going on. Oh, this is just a keyboard. But no point in leaving it there. Audio is good. Video is good. I've already got 12 people on the unauthorized chat. DLive is showing up. So thanks for tuning in. Tonight we are going to talk about two concepts that happen to be neologisms that I coined in the past. And it's been interesting to see that they've become increasingly popular on the internet. You're starting to see the terms pop up, all over the place, whether it's on YouTube or other places, and it's always both satisfying and bewildering when you see what neologisms get picked up and which ones don't. I mentioned this on the blog, but I'll mention it briefly here for the benefit of those who prefer video to reading. I don't coin terms generally, in order to, impress people or create something. I did occasionally, I suppose I was a little bit occasionally guilty of trying to be clever back when I was writing my video game reviews for the St. Paul Pioneer Press. In my defense, I was in my early and mid 20s. I didn't know any better, but I remember I stopped doing that because on a review for Wing Commander 3, I said something that wasn't true. I was trying to make the point that the nature of the gameplay in Wing Commander 3 was fundamentally different because of the way that it was incorporating the heavy level of cutscenes into the game. And I think I said something utterly retarded, like, what I call an eye move, or something. It was a horrible neologism. It wasn't true. I didn't call it that. I didn't even think about it. It was a lazy way of trying to explain that the gameplay was different. And one thing that I think is very healthy to do if you are meta aware of your own behavior is that if you do something that embarrasses you, if you do something that kind of makes you cringe when you think about it, is that you should modify your behavior so you don't do it again. And that was the day that I decided I'm not going to say that I call something anything if I don't. It's a lazy journalistic trick. You see it frequently in usually in the newspapers back in the day that the newspapers were more widely read. But there's people who like to play games with words. Umberto Eco being the great example of this. There's a fantastic scene in Foucault's Pendulum when this editor and his two friends are just kicking around, playing word games with Latin. And so they're making up names, they're making up words to describe concepts that are just totally nonsensical. The two that I remember in particular were mechanical avuncular gratulation, which was the science of building machines to greet uncles, and tetraphylectomy, which was the art of splitting a hair 4 ways. Now, these are not useful terms. It's just people playing with language, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's very entertaining, and it does make the point in Echo's book that these particular characters are highly intelligent, which is actually very important for the nature of the plot. I don't know if you're aware of Foucault's Pendulum. It's a difficult read. It's not a light read. If you thought The Name of the Rose was a difficult read, you haven't seen anything yet. But after all of this nonsense, all of these word games and so forth, they've come up with this massive conspiracy theory. They've thrown everything into it. Every single concept that they can come up with, every single conspiracy, every single historical tidbit. And then the leader disappears. He suddenly disappears, and then one of the guys gets a phone call and he says, the plot, it's real. And then disappears again, hangs up, disappears. And his friends are left to wonder what on earth is going on when you consider the fact that how can the plot be real when they made it up? It's not possible. So anyhow, that's when it starts to get good. I mean, it was entertaining just because Echo's an engaging writer, but the plot doesn't really get going for the first 100 pages or so. That's why it can be a little bit, I used to recommend it to people and they would come back to me and say, what on earth are you recommending me that book for? Anyhow, the reason that I create these neologisms is because I need a way to describe things in an efficient manner. Think about it. How would you describe the gamma? Well, he's a smart boy. Oops, suddenly we're right back to, neologisms and stuff again. But, he's smart, but he's delusional. He's narcissistic and insecure, but feels superior, usually not athletic. I mean, it's so inefficient, and also we name things for a reason, and there are a lot of things in this world which still don't have names. I was having a conversation with my son one night, and he's like, he said, how come you're always making up these names for things? And I said, well, here's an example. And we started discussing the difference between rhetoric and rhetoric dialectic. And I don't have any new terms for those things. I tend to switch between capital R rhetoric and small r rhetoric. That is sufficient for the purposes. But dialectic has become a confusing term because Marx and Hegel both stole the term from Aristotle for no reason and used it. They essentially redefined it, and so now people, when you use the term dialectic correctly, they'll tell you that you're wrong. So that's why you'll often see me specifying Aristotelian dialectic, not Hegelian, not Marxist. And that's why I also think that it's good to utilize new terms when they describe something that is fundamentally different from the original concept, or the concept that it tends to be confused with. And that's why I think it's important to distinguish between the terms midwit and gamma. You know, is there a lot of overlap? Certainly. You know, do we see a lot of midwits exhibiting gamma behavior? Sure. But it's not the same thing. You know, it's orthogonal. You can be, you know, there's probably also a similar correlation between height and, or I should say, lack of height and gamma status. Just as gammas tend to be a bit more intelligent than the norm, they also tend to be a bit shorter than the norm. But nobody confuses the concept short with gamma, but a lot of people seem to have a little trouble distinguishing between midwit and gamma. Yeah, I don't like the idea that the concept of a word being made up. You know, Sicilian Switchblade points out, somebody at some point had to make up every word that exists. That's exactly right. And, you know, I would guess that a lot of words are made up by people whose perspective tends to be a little bit different, a little bit odd, a little bit outside the norm, because those are the kind of people who think about these things. You know, I mean, there is a personality type, and frankly, I tend to suspect it tends to correlate pretty heavily with both gamma and midwit. You know, there is a sort of person who is like the little kid at the wedding. You know, somebody gets up, they tell a joke, everybody laughs. I use this example a lot because it was just, it was, I was fairly young at the time. I think I was like maybe, I don't know, somewhere between 9 and 11. And I was at a wedding, and it confused me so much that this guy got up, told a joke, and then this kid, who was a little bit older than would have made it okay, got up and literally went to the microphone and said exactly the same thing that the man had just said. Yeah, because he wanted to get the social affirmation of the laughter. And of course, nobody laughed. They're all like, what's wrong with this kid? What, did he not hear that somebody just said that? Maybe we need a term for that behavior anyhow. But it was really strange. And yet people do this all the time. All the time. I mean, for like here, Q 1882 says, tries to define a new term, retorect, slang, to be demolished by rhetoric. Yeah, no. I mean, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. That's the kind of thing I'm going to consciously define a term that for which there's no need, and I'm not sure why. Actually, maybe you can tell me, Q1882, what is the motivation for defining a term like retorect? I'm just curious as to what drives, what was the, and don't be embarrassed, this is, I mean, you're being very helpful here. What is the motivation for doing that? I thought it was fun. Well, I mean, fine, but I don't think I thought it was fun. I mean, did you also think it was clever? a way to say someone won in rhetoric. Well, yeah, but I mean, they won. that's that's yeah. We don't have special words for. Well, this is the word if you win in football, but this is the word if you win in fight. Uh, I mean, it's fine. I'm not. This is not criticism. I'm just pointing out that there is, for example, after William S. Lind, and I just saw, by the way, I just saw an example of this today. After William S. Lind introduced the very useful concept of fourth generation warfare, which was kind of a spin on a concept that that Martin Van Creveld had developed called non-Trinitarian, or I would actually revise that to post-Trinitarian warfare. But they immediately began talking about fifth generation warfare, sixth generation warfare. I've even seen people talking about seventh generation warfare, which is pretty remarkable. Apparently, we've ripped through the generations in less than a decade, whereas it took 200 years to get to fourth generation, right? Now there, I think that it's a bit of a scholarly, intellectual ambition thing. People saw how Lind and Creveld were considered to be major thinkers. I mean, here they are, thinking originally and coming up with useful and important concepts that people have been writing about for 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years. Q1882 graciously sends a nice super chat, says reconciling retardery. I don't think that was retardery, honestly. Well, I'm okay. Yeah, maybe the term itself was, but the desire to do so I don't think is retardery. Matty I says, well, you see, Vox, things are developing very quickly. We may be on 8th generation warfare by next Tuesday, apparently. James says, watching from the UK, love your insight, Vox. Thank you, brother. Thank you, James. That's very kind. Fair enough. Q1882, he did say he might have to, so, respect. It's kind of funny, though. I don't know what Q1882 means, but it always makes me think of the Murakami novel. So I do like the handle. But anyhow, the key thing, there's two aspects to a neologism that justifies its existence. Actually, no, I'm going to add one. There's three. We sound like Monty Python skit here. There are three aspects of a neologism that justifies its existence. Number one, does it describe something real? The best neologisms are essentially taxonomical in nature. They describe something real. I like to use the okapi as an example. It's an animal that has existed for thousands, tens of thousands of years. But Europeans didn't know it existed and didn't believe it existed. Now, it had been discovered. It had not only been discovered, it had been named by the Africans in the Congo. Of course, I think the name translated to something like zebra with a long neck, or stumpy neck giraffe with stripes. As those kind of very literal names. But the Europeans finally discover it in the 19th century, and they name it the okapi. And now we have the ability to distinguish between the okapi, the zebra, the giraffe, and we know what they are, and we can better talk about them We can better communicate in a reasonable manner. We can better analyze them. This is all good. This is all useful. So the first aspect is it has to be something real. So what's the difference between midwit and gamma? Midwit is a range of intelligence. I just, as a useful approximation, I define it as being between 105 and 120 IQ. It doesn't matter. It's pretty arbitrary. Maybe 107 to 117 would actually be more useful. Again, it doesn't actually matter. Gamma, on the other hand, is a male pattern behavior. A woman can be a midwit. A gamma can't. A woman can be a midwit. A woman can't be a gamma. So, Inquisitor Bear says, in this new era, an animal either is or is not an okapi. Precisely. So, is there a relationship between gamma and narcissist? No, I don't think so. If you look at the different, patterns of behavior, okay, they're clearly alpha narcissists. They're are not as clearly Bravo narcissists. In fact, I think it might be very difficult to be a narcissist and a Bravo. I don't think deltas are narcissistic, but they do have some narcissistic tendencies in certain specific areas. The delta tends to primarily concern himself with how his behavior and choices are perceived. It's not important that I defend myself or my interests. The main thing is that if my wife left me, that everybody understands I put my kids first. The need for people to see that and understand that and know that about you is a little bit narcissistic. Why do you care that people know that? If your only real concern is about your kids, why are you, why do you need to make such a big deal about it, right? I have no idea what this comment means. Maddie says, you can see dread set in people's eyes as they show something on their phone and no one laughs. I've actually been told by a recovered gamma. He's definitely a delta now, but he was a gamma for many years, according to him, and his father was a gamma, and he said that he was pretty convinced that a leading indicator of gamma, of someone being a gamma, is the tendency to stick your phone in someone's face. Maybe that's true. I don't know. I mostly have phones stuck in my face by women, to the extent that anybody sticks phones in my faces. So, stolen jokes for social credit. Okay. Is there a link? Okay, so no, the short answer is there's no link between gamma and narcissist, particularly. No special thing. So when you look at the first aspect is it's real. The second aspect is it useful? Does it actually, it's describing a real thing. Do people have any need to describe that real thing? In the case of the okapi, it's very clear. We have this animal. we need a name when we're going to ship 2 of them over to the London Zoo. It would be useful to tell them what it is. And we can't just say, there's a big kind of striped giraffe thing in the box. You know? So the name is useful. In the same way, it's very useful to be able to label, to identify both the midwit and the gamma. I think the sigma is considerably less useful, but people have latched onto it as a alternative status signifier that is more accessible than alpha. That's my theory. Because, you know, it puzzles me that people get so concerned about sigma and sigma grind set, and this person's a sigma and that person's a sigma, and I'm a sigma because of this. And if you want to know what being a sigma is like, the funniest thing about it, especially when people were trying to claim that I had, I invented this new title, and in order to be able to claim that my status was high. I mean, no. My status is, and for pretty much my entire adult life, has always been high. I defined it specifically to make it clear to people that I'm not a freaking alpha. Because that's just what everybody had labeled me, identified me, was looking to me to behave like, and I just knew it wouldn't. I knew it did not apply. Owen has explained this quite well. What should we do, Vox? I don't know. Do what you want. But what do you think we should do? I haven't thought about you at all. I mean, it's kind of comical. Joe Katzman said, I've explained sigma to a couple of real ones, and suddenly their lives made way more sense to them. Well, see, that's when you know it is real. That's when you know it's useful. And Coffee Ground Spare says, sigmas don't seek to draw a crowd to explain how much of a sigma they are. No, I mean, think about it. What do you hear me talking about more? Gammas, bravos, deltas, sigmas? I don't talk about it that much. You know why? Because it's not interesting to me. I know all about it. Everyone loves a mystery, and sigmas were always the people who didn't fit preconceptions. Well, yeah, that's the pattern of the behavior, is that there is not that much of a pattern. Sam has it right. My sigma boss, I literally don't care what you do so long as this is done. It's kind of funny because that's almost word for word what I used to tell the guys working for Fenris Wolf. Because we didn't have offices. We were totally virtual from day one. And I remember telling them at the company meetings, look, I don't want you to do anything that doesn't get the job done. And I don't care how you do it as long as it gets done, and it gets done well. I said, so if the best way for you to get your job done is to go home and work while you're standing on your head, go home and stand on your head. It's a little difficult even now, my lack of interest in how people go about their jobs, because they keep trying to tell me how they did it, how they're going to do it, how they think they should do it. And I don't care. I want it done, and I want it done well. And I don't want to have to tell you how to do it. And I don't want to listen to a litany of your thought processes involved. It's of no utility to me. If I need to know something, if I want to know something, I'll ask you. Now, this is not necessarily good. It's not necessarily bad either, but, people need their ego stroked. One of the guys, one of our top guys that I work with regularly, he said, can we schedule a monthly brag session? I said, I can handle listening to it once a month, and that is showing the problem, one of the problems with a Sigma boss. He's not interested enough in the team. Alphas are better. If you have a team and you're leading a team, it is much better to be an alpha. It doesn't mean that Sigmas can't be incredibly effective. Arthur Wellington was the man who defeated Napoleon's armies and then finally Napoleon himself at Waterloo, is probably the quintessential Sigma. I was laughing when I was reading his biography because it's so obvious, just in so many ways. And the thing that was a little bit, surprising, if you don't understand SSH, if you're not familiar with it, you don't know about it, it's hard to balance the two statements, which were none of his troops loved him. Mostly they didn't even like him very much. But the same officer who was saying that the troops did not love him and his officers didn't like him, they said just the sight of his long, pointy nose on the day of battle was worth 10,000 men. How do you balance that without understanding? I mean, that alone, those two things right there, should be enough to tell you, oh, that's a Sigma leader. They didn't like him, but they knew they needed him, and they had 100% confidence in him. Right? Matty I says, my alpha dad is like a counselor, financial advisor, and prayer leader for so many employees. Yeah, alphas are great. That's why people like them so much. That's why women are so drawn to them. Sam says, it seems like teams led by a Sigma seem to be kind of a motley crew of guys with useful skills who don't necessarily get along. that pretty much describes the entire operation. Other than the fact that there's an amount of respect across the board, the almost complete lack of interest in what everybody else is doing is, virtually comical. We could definitely use some more deltas. We could definitely use an alpha at some point in time. Ladumba says, also look at Putin and Xi, both Sigmas, quite obviously, by the way. So they can lead, but the difference between them and how Trump leads is huge. Yeah, definitely. One of the problems that both Putin and Xi have is they have no successor. Who can succeed Xi? Who can succeed Putin? Maybe someone will come up, but they're very unlikely to be anywhere nearly as skilled or adept at addressing the responsibilities as either of those two leaders. Now people keep trying to get it. 3.7 says sigma alpha relation to introversion extroversion. It's just a tendency towards correlation. You can have extroverted sigmas, you can have introverted alphas. It's not, I mean, the patterns of behavior are not, they don't map directly to, the whole, what is it, the ICED or whatever, the acronym based personality profile, or just the simple binary introversion extroversion. Why do you think the sigma rank is being subverted? Because everybody wants to claim it. There's a super chat from Sam. Thank you, Sam. He says, Vox, heard you carried a chainsaw from the store to the car with no bloodshed. Delta achieved. Well, I am a trucker. And trucking is about the most Delta occupation you can have. So, I'm working on my Delta thing. I had a beer the other day. With the guys. Just had a beer. Didn't have a glass of wine. Could have had a glass of wine. Didn't have a glass of wine. Had a beer. Like a proper Delta. One of these days, I might even try turning the chainsaw on. Probably not, though. So back to why do you think the sigma rank is being subverted? I think mostly it's because gammas, who used to try to redefine themselves as, stealth alphas or secret alphas or something like that, I think that they have figured out they can't get away with that, not having dated the homecoming queen or any of the cheerleaders or even really talked to any of them. So they realized that there's no way that they could get away with that. But Sigma's, Sigma's, he's like me. People don't get him. They don't get me. And he doesn't necessarily go to all the parties, and I don't go to any of the parties. Like, no. People confuse sigmas with alphas for a reason. They don't confuse them with, here's the thing. One way that you know that somebody might be a sigma is that it's almost comical to try to describe them as a delta. It's comical not just to my wife, but pretty much to my entire family whenever I have to do anything that is reasonably delta related. They will literally play the song Working Class Hero at me. So, what do you do? Trailwalker Bear says, working at a wilderness therapy place, the SSH was very apparent every time I was put with the boys. Okay, I take it Trailwalker Bear might be a girl. But yeah, women understand it. It's kind of funny because women tend to recognize these ranks faster and accept them more completely, more than men do. Mostly because, it doesn't, they don't get their panties in a bunch over, am I Delta? Am I Gamma? Here, let me write you a wall of text about me and then you can tell me what I am. You're like, okay, dude, that's a 3-page wall of text. I'm not gonna read it, but based on the word count alone, I'm gonna guess that you're a Gamma. Alphas never ask you what they are. They're like, hey, obviously I'm an alpha. You know, does Vox think he's a bigger alpha than me? He's not a bigger alpha than me. We're cool then. Swedish Trash Panda disagrees. He says feminists hate these categories being talked about. Do they really? I mean, I knew they hated the whole pickup artist stuff, which makes sense to me. Why would they care about men understanding what the patterns of behavior are? Frake says, you sometimes like Ian M. Banks, I think. Yeah, that's true. I think he's a very talented writer. I think he's a very creative and original writer. I think he also wrote the worst book I've ever read. I think he has a dark and filthy side to his soul that I find repulsive, but he seldom gives it free rein. What books are good to start if you haven't read him? I think his best science fiction book, and the book that I would begin with just to be able to appreciate him on the fiction side, or on the science fiction side, would be The Player of Games. I really like that book. I don't actually like how it went in parts, but I really like the idea of it. I thought there were really compelling elements of it. It's a kind of book that I would like to write a book on a related topic someday. On the literary side, which is to basically say the non-genre side, because he's not a particularly literary writer, I think The Business would be a good one. It's very astute. It's very in harmony with what I know of the business, corporate, techno investment world. So give it a try. I don't think you'd be disappointed in either. What do you think of Bobby Kennedy leaving the Dems and running as independent? I think that it could be used as a narrative to explain why Joe Biden wins the next election despite his obvious unpopularity. But I think if the votes are counted reasonably fairly, that Bobby Kennedy actually hurts the Democrats. But but if we're looking at what happened in 2020 and assuming that there's going to be similar chicanery around the election, I think that might be the narrative to explain why Trump didn't win, because Bobby Kennedy took so many votes from him. I think it's nonsense. Jay Bila says, what is Marshal Zhukov? When he told Stalin to abandon Kiev, he said no, and then he told him, if you don't listen to me, then send someone else. I mean, it's hard to say. I've read his autobiography, and I've read about him. I mean, generally speaking, he's almost certainly an alpha, right? Remember, everything's relative, yes, but there's a core natural behavior pattern that adult men have. Like for example, on my football team, I'm a delta. I'm not always like successfully, fully delta, but that's my role. That's what I am. That's the role I play. That's how I try to behave. Because I understand how SSH works, I believe I'm able to do so fairly successfully. But, I mean, this is a guy who is, commanding hundreds of thousands of men. A man who's massively respected. So anyhow, and apparently in his youth a bit of a lad, a bit of a player. I mean, remember this is a guy who was a cavalry officer, so the whole strut and swagger thing. So I'm pretty sure that Zukov was an alpha. Trash Panda says they hate the idea of there being categories that women aren't a part of. Yeah, that's true. You always know that a woman's got a little bit of feminist in her when the first thing she says when she hears about SSH is, well, what are the female ranks? Like, there aren't any. Deal. You know? They also think the whole notion of an alpha is disproved. Oh, yeah, well, that's just the usual feminist nonsense. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I literally don't talk to feminists. I mean, I'm sure there's a few women that I know that consider themselves to be feminists, but in a second wave sense or that kind of thing, and just total nonsense. You know. I mean, I just honestly I don't know. Let's see here. Anthony says, I did an A-B comparison with the SSH with two women. The feminist freaked out. The non-feminist used it to get an amazing job. There you go. So, anyhow, we haven't gotten to the third point yet, and now I have to remember what the third point was. So the first point was it has to describe something real. The second point, it has to have utility. Oh, and then of course, the third point is it needs to be accepted for some reason. There has to be a reason for people to want to use it. Now, one reason could be, but is insufficient. That's why it sounds a bit like a tautology, but it's not. Because there are other terms that are massively useful, arguably more useful than the terms that have become adopted and widespread to some extent, and they're just not picked up. They're not used. I have no idea why people continue to just say science. I mean, like science, but not like professional to professional. I mean the method. And, like the term Scientology it's easy. It's not very long. It's not hard to remember. Maybe it's a little awkward, but, we're talking about science. We're talking about a heavily technical matter. Scientage is even easier. That one actually rolls off the tongue, right? But for some reason, people like the confusion of the three terms. You've got the actual scientific method, you've got the knowledge base, and you've got the profession. Now, again, this is where you might be, I might be too dialectic. Maybe it's possible that, there has to be rhetorical element to a successful neologism. Could be. Cliff Cosmic says the problem is Scientology sounds like a frog in a lab coat. I don't even know where to go with that. Maybe. Anyhow, it's. I don't think you're wrong. I mean, that for all I know, that may be the primary reason that it will never become any sort of accepted term. But stupid things happen for retarded reasons all the time. Joe says it's not too dialectic. It needs to be more mnemonic so people remember which is which. Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's why I thought scientage for the knowledge base, the fact that knowledge, scientage, I thought that would be sufficient, but it was clearly wrong. Um, Sam says, a great neologism is like the best engineering feats in that it elicits everyone using the word or design, and why didn't we think of that? Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear to me. I don't usually intentionally come up with a neologism. It's usually I'm writing something and I'm reaching to describe something, and it's just easier to make something up. But a lot of people have expressed both understanding and appreciation for, and have begun to use the term green flag. I think that's useful. I said specifically, we need to have a term that distinguishes a false flag from something that is not a false flag. People kept saying, this is a false flag, that's a false flag. Pearl Harbor's not a false flag. Pearl Harbor got attacked by the Japanese. But, there seems to be more to the story than just saying, hey, it was an attack on U.S. territory, a U.S. naval base, by the Japanese Navy. So that's why, and the thing that I thought it was interesting how everybody immediately understood it. Everybody immediately got it. Which again shows that those three elements, it describes a real thing. It's a useful term because it distinguishes from a similar related term, and people have accepted it. It's already being used by people that don't pay any attention to me. So that's good. Is potentially one of the greatest neologisms of all time was actually Shakespeare. I was astonished how many words he appears to have introduced into the language. It's just staggering. Especially because I don't know how many of them were really all that necessary. And of course, it's possible that he was, they weren't his creations. They just happened to appear first in print in one of his plays. But either way, it's still impressive. And also, like you need that to be impressed by Shakespeare, right? Horatius underlines the utility of the term green flag. He says, I always had a hard time explaining that difference to people since 9/11. Well, right, and that's, if you look at all the terms that I use, all the neologisms that I create, they're almost all intended to distinguish between something that is not previously lumped together. So you have science, versus having the three aspects of science versus having names for the three aspects of science, right? I mean, it'd be like constantly referring to God rather than to God the Father, Jesus Christ the Son, and the Holy Ghost. It's always useful to be able to have some sort of fractal identification. I shouldn't say it's always useful. It is frequently useful to have some level of fractal identification because it allows for deeper understanding. And so, and that's why I think it's so important to distinguish the midwit from the gamma. They're not just insults. They're not necessarily insulting at all. If you are a midwit or you are a gamma, it is not an insult to be identified as one. That's literally what you are. And I think it's too bad that things like these are often perceived as insults, because we need to have the terms to be able to discuss what's real. How do you describe the problematic behaviors that make up the behavioral pattern if you can't even talk about the behavioral pattern or identify it or articulate it? So anyhow, oh, doggone it. I meant to have this up put this up while we were talking. This was a common meme that I modified a little bit in order to help make the concept clear to people. This is a modification of that regular IQ related meme, and it just is intended to show that midwits are a little bit smarter than the norm. Yeah. Cliff says, but gamma is such a fun way to insult people. Hey, I'm probably more guilty of it than most, right? Reminds me of the personality tests that attempt to call neuroticism something else because neurotic people became neurotic when called it. Yeah. Sam says, whoever coined the term wind-up toy coined a great one. Great neologism. Yeah, wind-up toy is very useful. People understand immediately what people are talking about. It's a much more useful term than the similar term patsy. It has more actual meaning to it, has a deeper meaning to it, and it also successfully conveys the idea a lot better. I try to explain to my cousin that I'm not insulting him when I call him a moron. Look, I'm not insulting you. Your IQ is literally 64, or whatever it is. Cactus Eater Bear. People say midwit when they mean dimwit. I think midwit is more fun to say. Well, I just think that dimwit's been around for a long time. I actually coined midwit in part to distinguish it from dimwit. Mowgli says, for the history sub, it was March, May for book 1 of Landmark, June through August for book 2. Yes, the third book was announced. It is the other it's the second volume of the Cambridge Medieval History. The two medieval histories are going to ship together, and I can even show you what the title page of the new book 3 looks like. So this is, I should put it here. This is book 2, the title page, and this is, I believe this one, yeah, this is book 1. So history subscribers, we're hoping to get both of these out before Christmas. The Cambridge Medieval History Volume 1, the later Roman Empire to the 12th century, and the Cambridge Medieval History Volume 2, the 12th century to the Renaissance. And if you're into architecture, it might please you to know that the architectural styles being demonstrated are related to the periods involved. Gorgeous, they are gorgeous. I can't wait. I cannot wait to get my hands on those. So, and for those of you who haven't, we haven't put it up for. We'll put it up for sale. We need to get Law Dog and Promethean made available in the store for those who are not subscribers. We've got about, I don't know, 30 or so of each left, and they turned out great. And both of them, Promethean and Law Dog, are just great standalone books. Super chat for Matty Ice. Thank you for the stream. Please absolve me of retardation. Well, te absolvo. Go forth and retard no more. Would you do a stream on the differences between 4th Gen war and unrestricted war? Certainly. I think that it's not impossible that we might find that unrestricted war which we'll eventually come up with a better name for, is arguably more important than fourth generation war. We'll see. So, all right. One last question. Conciser Bear. In terms of flags, what was the Gulf of Tonkin incident? Well, let's see. That would technically be a false flag, I think, because if I recall correctly, the ship hit its own mine. Like the ship hit an American mine. Is that what happened? Anyhow, I'll have to look it up. My understanding was that the American ship hit an American mine. It was blamed on the Vietnamese, claimed they were mining the harbor. In that case, it would be a false flag. So, well, thanks very much. We will see you at the next Darkstream. I'm Vox Day, and you have been watching Unauthorized TV.